There's a village in Japan where people routinely live past 100. Not just a few people, hundreds of them. Okinawa has one of the highest concentrations of centenarians on Earth. For decades, scientists flew in from around the world trying to figure out why. They tested genetics. They analyzed the water. They studied the soil, the air, the local plants. And then they found it. It wasn't a supplement. It wasn't a medical breakthrough. It wasn't even a new discovery. It was something every person in that village had learned. Before they were old enough to cook their own food. Before every meal, they say a short phrase out loud. Hara Hachi, 3 words, said quietly like a small prayer before picking up their chopsticks. And somehow, those 3 words may be the most important health advice ever passed down in human history. Let me explain what it means and why it changes everything. Hara Hachi is an ancient Confucian, saying that Okinawans have carried for centuries. Literally translated, it means, eat until you are 80% full, not stuffed, not fully satisfied, just mostly there. When most people hear this, they immediately think it sounds like a diet rule, like calorie restriction dressed up in Japanese packaging, something you try for a week and then abandon when life gets hard. But it's not a diet. It's a completely different relationship with food, one that shapes not just what you eat, but how you think about eating in the first place. Here's the biology that makes it so powerful. Your stomach and your brain don't communicate in real time. When you eat, your gut sends signals to your brain saying, "We're getting full." But those signals take about 15 to 20 minutes to arrive, which means that if you eat until you feel full, until that clear sensation of satisfaction hits, you've already overshot. By the time your brain receives the message, your stomach has been past 100% for several minutes. This isn't a flaw. It's how human biology evolved in environments where food was scarce. Eating as much as possible was a survival advantage. The delay in satiety signaling wasn't a problem when meals were rare. But in a world of constant food availability, that same delay works against us. We keep eating past the point of need because the feedback arrives too late. The Okinawans understood this, not through modern physiology, but through centuries of lived experience, passed from grandparent to grandchild. They learned that the feeling of full is not a useful target. It always comes too late. So they built a different target and they said it out loud before every meal, so they couldn't forget it. That's what Hara Hachi is, a pre-commitment, a verbal contract with yourself, made before appetite takes over. Blue Zone's researcher Dan Buettner spent years identifying the longest living populations on Earth. He called these regions Blue Zones, 5 places where people consistently reach their 90s and 100s, without the chronic diseases that end most lives early. Okinawa was one of them. When Buettner's team analyzed what made these communities different, one pattern appeared across every Blue Zone. The people who lived longest had deeply embedded habits of eating less than they could. The specific foods varied. The religions varied. The geography varied. But the underlying relationship with food was strikingly consistent. Eat less than you could. Stop before you're finished. Buettner's conclusion was direct. The 80% rule, he wrote, may be the easiest thing you can do to add years to your life. Not the hardest. The easiest. In the 1960s, the average Okinawan consumed approximately 1,785 calories per day. Americans at the same time were averaging closer to 3,000. Yet Okinawans were physically active, maintaining healthy body weights and living decades, longer than almost anyone else on the planet. The difference was not genetics. Studies of Okinawans who migrated to other countries and adopted Western diets showed that their longevity advantage disappeared within a generation. The genes traveled, the culture didn't. And the culture was what mattered. Controlled research on caloric restriction has confirmed what Okinawan tradition already knew. Eating fewer calories consistently over a lifetime is one of the most reliable ways to extend healthy lifespan. Studies across dozens of species show the same pattern. Moderate caloric restriction slows aging and extends life. The leading explanations involve reduced oxidative stress, lower chronic inflammation, improved insulin sensitivity, and a process called autophagy, a kind of cellular housekeeping that ramps up when the body isn't constantly overwhelmed by digestion. When you eat less, your body has more capacity to repair itself. Hara Hachi isn't folk wisdom dressed up to sound scientific. The science is simply catching up to. what an island of centenarians already knew. So how do you actually do this? The first thing to understand is that Hara Hachi, but cannot be forced through willpower alone. You cannot simply decide, starting tomorrow, that you will eat 80% of every meal. That kind of rigid rule following works for a few days, then collapses the moment you're stressed, rushed, or genuinely hungry. What the Okinawans did was different. They made it a ritual, a pause, a small moment of intention that happened before the meal began, before hunger and appetite had taken full control of the decision. The phrase itself was the technology. Saying Hara Hachi Bu out loud before eating functioned like a reset button. It shifted the default endpoint. Instead of eating toward full, you were eating toward mostly satisfied. The target was different, and because it was set in advance, it had a chance of actually being honored. This is why pre-commitment matters so much in behavior change. Decisions made before desire takes over are dramatically more reliable than decisions made in the middle of wanting something. People who decide what they'll eat before they're hungry make consistently better choices than people who decide at the moment of appetite. Hara Hachi Bu is a pre-commitment device that Okinawans had been using for generations before. Behavioral economics had a name for it. There's a second element of Okinawan food culture that amplifies this practice: the way meals are served. Traditional Okinawan meals come on many small plates, not one large bowl. Many small dishes, each containing a little of something different: vegetables, tofu, fish, rice, fermented foods. The meal is spread out rather than stacked up. This structure is not accidental. Food researchers have documented extensively that people eat more slowly and more mindfully when food is presented in multiple small portions rather than one large serving. The eye takes in more. The pace naturally slows. The brain perceives the variety as abundance and reaches a sense of satisfaction earlier than it would with an undifferentiated pile of food on a single plate. The environment of eating shapes the behavior of eating. The Okinawans didn't rely on willpower. They built a food culture: the small plates, the communal meals, the ritual phrase that made Hara Hachi Bu easy to practice without thinking about it. Here's the uncomfortable truth: Okinawa's longevity advantage is disappearing. After World War II, American military presence on the island introduced fast food chains, processed foods, and the culture of larger portion sizes. The younger generations of Okinawans, those raised in the westernized food environment, now have obesity rates and rates of chronic disease that are among the highest in Japan. The same island, the same genetics, two different food cultures, two dramatically different health outcomes. This is one of the most important natural experiments in the history of nutrition research, and its conclusion is difficult to avoid. Individual willpower without cultural support is not enough. The Okinawans who lived to 100 didn't get there through discipline and deprivation. They got there because the culture around them had already made the right choices easy and the wrong choices uncommon. You probably don't live in that culture, but you can borrow from it. Start with one thing: eat slower than you currently do. Put down your fork or chopsticks between bites. Chew more than feels necessary. Have a conversation during a meal instead of scrolling. Give your body the 15 to 20 minutes it needs to report back to your brain. Then, before your next meal, try this: take a single breath and ask yourself quietly, how hungry am I actually? Not as a diet calculation, not as a calorie audit, just as a moment of awareness before appetite fully takes the wheel. This is the essence of Hara Hachi, but not a rule about percentages, but a pause, a moment of intention before each meal that shifts your default relationship with food from unconscious to conscious. You don't need to move to Okinawa. You don't need to memorize research papers or count anything at all. You just need to introduce a breath, a question, a small moment of attention before you begin. Over time, that pause changes things. Your portions adjust naturally. Your meals become more deliberate. You stop eating past the point of comfort, not because you're forcing yourself to stop, but because you've trained yourself to notice that point before it becomes invisible. Hara Hachi Bu. Eat until you're mostly full, and leave a little room for the years you're not finished living yet. If this kind of wisdom, the kind that's been quietly working for centuries before anyone thought to study it, resonates with you, follow for more. There's a lot of it.